How does the worst-looking machine ever built become the most important locomotive in history? In 1949, they called it the engine everyone mocked, a stripped-down boxcar on wheels. Half of America's freight still crawled behind dying steam on 130,000 miles of secondary track. Railroads were bleeding cash. The man who designed it had half a day of formal schooling. He made it ugly on purpose. That ugliness killed steam, bankrupted 3 legendary companies, and saved an entire industry. It began with one self-taught engineer who decided beauty was the one thing a locomotive couldn't afford. Richard McLean Dilworth entered the world on March 6, 1885, in Seattle, then a raw, rain-soaked outpost at the edge of the American map. His father, Richard Birch Dilworth, wore the dust of 2 frontiers, a Civil War veteran who later rode shotgun as an armed guard along the Santa Fe Trail, keeping stage lines safe from bandits and the unknown. According to family law, the elder Dilworth's time on the trail paid for his way through Princeton Theological School, and his sermons in the new Washington Territory carried the grit of a man who had seen the country's roughest edges. Dick Dilworth grew up in a house where survival was learned by doing, not by reading. The stories say he spent only half a day in formal school, if that. No report card survives, no diploma hangs in any archive. What's clear is that Dilworth's education came from the world itself. He learned to wire circuits and fix broken things before most boys could read. Some tales claim he picked up his first real skills in the United States Navy, working as an electrician on ships. But official enlistment records are silent. Whether in a Navy engine room or a Seattle workshop, Dilworth's hands found their way to electricity, and electricity became his language. By 1914, city directories in Seattle list a young man named R.M. Dilworth working as an electrician at 214 3rd Avenue. 3 years later, his name appears on the payroll of the Pacific Coast Electric Railway in San Francisco, fixing and maintaining the wires that kept the city's streetcars moving. The 1920 census records him as a railroad electrician in Oakland, already turning his trade toward the world of locomotives. No university degree, no pedigree, just a reputation for solving problems others left behind. Dilworth's path was never one of titles or certificates. He moved by instinct, following the hum of current and the rhythm of machines. His father's stories of the Santa Fe Trail, of patched boots and loaded rifles, shaped a son who trusted what his own hands could build. By the time he entered the locomotive business, Dilworth carried with him the hard lessons of frontier survival: simple and work. Make it simple, make it work, and never waste a dollar on anything that doesn't earn its keep. It was this mindset, a stubborn, operator-first ethic forged far from any boardroom, that would define every machine he touched and every gamble he took in the name of progress. By the late 1940s, the arithmetic of American railroading had grown brutal and public. In October 1949, EMD unveiled the GP7, a machine born not from style, but from the ledger. The numbers that followed were stark. Over 2,734 GP7s rolled out by May 1954, with 2 factories, LaGrange and Cleveland, churning out up to 210 units a month at peak. These were not luxury engines for the main lines. They were built for the 130,000 miles of battered secondary track still ruled by steam, where half the country's freight limped along behind engines that spent a third of their lives in the shop. The contrast between what was and what could be was written in cold, uncompromising figures. Steam locomotives managed to be available just 35% of the time. Their diesel replacements, the new GP7s, delivered 95% availability. Where a steam engine cost 70 cents per mile to run, a diesel did the same work for 31 cents per mile. Each GP7, with its 1,500 horsepower and standardized guts, could replace 2.8 steam locomotives, an efficiency that cut through payrolls and parts rooms alike. Fuel savings soared to 60%. Maintenance hours fell from 180 per 1,000 miles to just 30 per 1,000 miles. The old world was shrinking fast. In 1925, there were nearly 59,000 steam locomotives in America. By 1951, only 22,000 remained, and most were clinging to branch lines that could no longer afford the luxury of nostalgia. The GP7 was not a machine that asked for love, it was a tool that demanded obedience from the balance sheet. John Barriger III, the uncompromising railroad president and economic strategist, put it plainly. Any rail profits realized since World War II are the result of diesel power. Barriger's judgment was not a boast, it was a warning. The numbers left no room for sentiment. If a railroad wanted to survive, it needed a locomotive that was cheap to buy, cheaper to run, and so plain that nobody would be tempted to keep it in the yard just to show it off. The stakes were measured not in paint or pride, but in payrolls, shops, and the survival of entire companies. The era demanded a new kind of machine, and one man would have to deliver it. The BL2 was supposed to be EMD's answer to the branch line problem, a diesel that could work the tough, unglamorous jobs steam still handled. But the BL2 was a lesson in what happens when style gets in the way of substance. Its swooping lines and awkward cab cutaways looked like a compromise between a streamlined passenger engine and a workhorse that did not know which world it belonged to. Railroads did not buy it. Only 58 BL2s ever left the factory, a sales record that barely registered against the mountain of steam engines still grinding away on America's backroads. Failure. Inside EMD, the failure cut deep. Engineering memos from 1948 and 1949 show a company reeling from the BL2's reception. The car body was expensive to build, hard to maintain, and most damning of all, crews hated it. One superintendent, quoted in a post-war trade journal, called the BL2 the engine nobody wanted to be seen with at headquarters and nobody wanted to work on in the yard. The BL2's rounded nose and tight cab made visibility poor, and the engine's complex sheet metal meant more time in the shop and higher costs per mile. It was, in the language of the shop floor, a pretty face with nothing under the hood. Comfort. Dick Dilworth saw the writing on the wall. He understood that the world did not need another showpiece. It needed a tool, one that could be built by the hundreds, run by the thousands, and fixed by anyone who could swing a wrench. According to later interviews and engineering notes, Dilworth insisted on a new doctrine. I wanted a locomotive that would feel like a steam cab to the engineer, but be so plain that the executives would never put it on a showcase line. The price had to be low enough that any short line could buy it, and the design had to be universal, road switcher, freight, or passenger. Familiarity. This was not just a matter of looks, it was a strategy. The GP7 would have no unnecessary curves, no fancy nose, no chrome. EMD's draftsman built a full-scale wooden cab mock-up in the Legrand shop, inviting veteran engineers to climb inside and critique every lever and every sight line. The goal was comfort and familiarity, not style. The cab was set high, with broad windows and controls laid out to mimic the best features of a steam locomotive. The hood was squared off and easy to open, giving mechanics direct access to the engine and electrical gear. Every bolt, every bracket, every panel was standardized to match the F-unit fleet. The result was a locomotive that looked, in the words of one railroad president, like a box on wheels. Straightforward. But that was the point. The GP7's ugliness was not a flaw, it was a weapon. Dilworth and his team stripped away anything that did not earn its keep. They built a machine that was cheap to buy, cheaper to run, and so unremarkable that no one would ever be tempted to save it for the main line. In the engineering files you can see the shift. The BL2's elaborate blueprints give way to the GP7's blunt, utilitarian diagrams. There is no romance here, only the cold logic of survival. The GP7 was designed to finish the job the BL2 could not, to sweep the last steam engines off the rails, not with beauty, but with brute, unyielding function. Alco had already written the playbook. Nearly a decade before the GP7, the American Locomotive Company rolled out the RS1 in 1941, a road switcher that looked, at least on paper, like the answer to every railroad's prayers. The RS1 could run both yard and main line, it had a hood design for visibility, and it wore the badge of the oldest name in American locomotive building. But invention alone did not win the war. Alco delivered just over 400 RS1s across 13 years, a respectable number, but a whisper compared to what would follow. The real contest was not about who invented the road switcher. It was about who could build it faster, cheaper, and at a scale the industry had never seen. EMD did not just copy the idea, they buried it under an avalanche of production muscle. By the time the GP7 hit the rails in October 1949, EMD's LaGrange plant was already legendary for its output. But that was not enough. In 1950, General Motors opened a second assembly line in Cleveland, Ohio, and then a third in London, Ontario. At peak, these factories could turn out over 200 locomotives a month, an industrial rhythm that no rival could match. Alco's engineers watched their own creation get outflanked by a company that treated locomotives like Chevrolets, standardize every part, eliminate hand-fitting, and never let a machine idle on the shop floor. The GP7 shared its engine, generator, and traction motors with EMD's F units, so railroads could run mixed fleets without doubling their spare parts. Every nut and bolt was interchangeable, every wiring diagram familiar. This was not just good engineering, it was a business model tuned for conquest. EMD's trade-in program was the final, ruthless stroke. Railroads could bring in worn-out Alco or Fairbanks Morse units, and EMD would credit them toward the price of a new GP7. The old engines were stripped, rebuilt, and reborn as GP7MS, modernized, standardized, and stamped with the EMD badge. This was not just a sales pitch, it was a way to erase the competition's footprint from the rails and the balance sheet. The numbers tell the story. Between 1949 and 1954, EMD shipped 2,734 GP7s. Alco, the originator, managed a fraction of that. The GP7's production lines ran day and night, feeding a market desperate to escape the costs of steam. For every RS1 that found a home, 5 or 6 GP7s thundered out of LaGrange or Cleveland, ready to replace not just engines, but entire ways of doing business. This was not a gentle transition. The GP7's arrival set off a cascade. Old shops closed, spare parts contracts vanished, and the names that built America's first locomotives faded into the background. The irony was sharp. Alco had built the first road switcher, but EMD built the last one that mattered. The GP7's ugliness was no accident. It was a sign of how little sentiment survived in the new calculus. In the end, what mattered was not who had the best idea, but who could deliver the future at scale, on time, and without mercy. Eddystone, Pennsylvania, 1956. The final whistle at Baldwin Locomotive Works marked more than the end of a shift. It signaled the end of an era. For over 100 years, Baldwin's shops had built the engines that drove the country forward, producing more than 70,000 locomotives. Now, 4,000 skilled workers faced locked gates. The foundry cooled, the hammering stopped, and a town built on steam and steel began to unravel. Union records from the International Association of Machinists show the workforce was slashed by more than half in one season. 3,500 men and women were handed severance or pushed into a retraining program that could not keep pace. Only 1,200 completed the diesel conversion course. The rest drifted away, some to distant plants, many to unemployment lines, their trades suddenly obsolete. Lima, Ohio, felt the same shock. The last steam locomotive, Nickel Plate Road, 284, number 779, left Lima's shops in August 1950. After merging with Baldwin, the plant's fate was sealed. In 1971, the factory that once built the world's mightiest engines shut down. 2,000 more jobs vanished. City Council records from that year show a 35% drop in tax revenue. 3 elementary schools closed, their classrooms emptied of children whose parents had kept the roundhouse alive. When the Lima shops were demolished in 1997, the last physical trace of that world disappeared. Eddystone and Lima were not just company towns, they were communities shaped by the railroad's rhythm. The loss of Baldwin triggered a cascade. Grocery stores closed, the hardware store shuttered, even the local paper stopped printing. Oral histories recall fathers teaching sons the art of pattern making, firemen learning the pulse of the steam house. By the late 1950s, those skills were relics, valued only in memory. Historian George Hilton wrote, "The diesel did not merely end an industry, it erased a way of life." Maintenance hours dropped from 180 to 30 per 1,000 miles. Fuel costs fell by 60%. Payrolls were slashed. The extinction of steam was not just technical progress, it was an industrial massacre, sweeping away engines, builders, and the towns that depended on them. A machine built to be invisible has outlasted everything that was meant to overshadow it. Dick Dilworth died in Clarendon Hills, Illinois, on October 7, 1968, 18 years after his retirement and long after the last steam whistle had faded from the main lines. He did not live to see the world his designs would create or the strange afterlife of the GP7. Yet the locomotive he shaped, the one no executive wanted on a calendar and no museum director raced to preserve, kept running. On short lines in Iowa and Oklahoma, in the humid air of Georgia and the dry wind of Montana, the GP7 remains. Not as a relic, not as a parade piece, but as a tool, hauling grain, lumber, chemicals, and the stubborn remains of local industry. Rosters from the Federal Railroad Administration in 2026 list more than 70 GP7 locomotives still in revenue service. One, former Chesapeake and Ohio number 5705, has logged an estimated 2.5 million miles, enough to circle the globe 100 times and then some. Its paint is faded, its cab patched and repatched, but the engine turns over each morning. The men and women who run these survivors do not talk about beauty or nostalgia. They talk about reliability, about the way the old EMD starts in winter, about the parts that still fit. The GP7 was never meant to be cherished. It was meant to work. Dilworth's legacy is not a statue or a plaque. It is the persistence of function, the refusal to die. The GP7 outlived its builder. It outlived the company that built it. General Motors sold off EMD in 2005. It outlived Baldwin, Lima, Alco, and the entire industrial ecosystem that once defined American railroading. Every time a GP7 rolls out of a siding in 2026, it carries with it the lessons of a century that survival is not about looking good, but about being good enough, day after day, mile after mile. The ugliest engine ever built became the monument to everything that was lost and everything that endures. Today, hundreds of GP7s, once scorned and now revered, still move freight across America. In Dick Dilworth's words, "If it had to be ugly, so be it. Let it be ugly enough to win." The steam towns it erased linger only in memory, but the lesson endures. Sometimes, survival demands we choose function over nostalgia. The rail lines endure, but the world they bridged is gone. Thanks for riding this line with us.